I think we're live now, though.
Oh, okay. Oh, now it's live. Yay! Awesome. Okay. Great. All right. Perfect. Austin, Texas,
Hi,
from
everybody.
Kenya. Wow. Wow. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
If you're just arriving, hello, welcome to our live stream. We had a couple of technical difficulties getting started, but I think we are live on all platforms now, so welcome. All right, and if you're just joining us, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. And then it looks like Bee's having a couple of difficulties over there technically, but we'll continue saying hi in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and get started once Bee's back with us. All right, I'm seeing we've got a variety of places that we're joining from. We've got a number of folks in India. We've got some folks in the US. I am also in the US. Let's see, we've got some folks in Montenegro. We got Kenya, Algeria. We got folks from all over. How exciting. Let me know in the chat, what time is it where you are? I'm curious always about that. What time is it where you are? For me, it is noon, so it's lunchtime. Wow, it is late in India. Thanks for joining us. If you're joining us super late, we hope this is worth your while, worth your late evening. We got 9 p.m. All right, kind of late, kind of toward the evening, maybe winding down a little bit. We got a 1 p.m. Okay, pretty close, pretty normal afternoon time there. All right. Yeah, we got some folks for whom it's pretty late. Well, glad you could make it here. All right. And then V, I'll let you take it away. I've just been asking everybody what time it is where they are. We got some folks who are joining us from very late in their evening, so I've been promising them that we'll make it worth their while.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. We're going to go over to the next slide here. As soon as So like we mentioned, we will be covering test scores, GRE test scores and others, and funding opportunities once you are accepted into graduate school. I'm just waiting here to get over to the next slide deck here. And I want to thank all of you for your patience because this is our first time streaming live to YouTube. Here we go. Great. Okay, so my name is Veronica, or V. I am an admissions instructor here with Magoosh. I'm currently a PhD student. I'm entering my 4th year. I can't believe it's gone by this quickly. I'm almost halfway through. And I'm currently at the University of California at Santa Barbara. And I am from the East Bay, East San Francisco, Bay Area. And I'm going to pass it over to Erica here.
Hi, so I'm Erica. I'm a senior education manager here at Magoosh. So that means I think about our educational content. So I think about our questions, I think about our lessons, I think about all of that good stuff when it comes to GRE, GMAT, and a bunch of our other exams as well. I'm a 99th percentile GRE and GMAT scorer. I've spent a number of years teaching test prep as a tutor, as well as a live class instructor, and also working as a content writer, writing questions, explanations, lessons, all of that. I also have spent a fair amount of time doing live streams and videos on platforms like YouTube, and I have more than 1 million views. Maybe you've seen some of my videos, maybe not. It's okay, I'm not offended. I live in Portland, Oregon, where I work from here. And I'll go ahead and pass it back to B.
Right. So also to clarify, if you do have questions, please go ahead and drop them for us. We will get through all of them throughout the webinar, okay? So let's go ahead and get over to the next slide here.
I just want to say thanks for your patience while we're working out some of our technical difficulties. Like V mentioned, we have mostly done some of this via a different platform before, so this is a little bit new for us. So thank you for your patience. Looks like V's joining us to carry on with the slide. Okay, I'm going to jump in and try to take this slide over for V. I'm going to preface this with the fact that I am not personally an admissions expert. I am a GRE and GMAT expert. But as a GRE and GMAT expert, I have worked with a lot of students who have been applying to grad school. So I do know some things about this process. And fortunately, it looks like V's back. V, I'm going to let you go for it with this slide. But I think what we're going to do is I'm just going to jump in and try to take it if we end up with some more difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually going to turn off my camera in case that can help me stay in the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. So as far as deciding what your GRE, the role it's going to play in your admission to your selected program, first step is to know where you're applying. Every single program is going to differ in its requirements, and sometimes they even change those requirements year by year. So you want to make sure to double check their most recent up-to-date requirement for that program, for each program you're applying to. Basic questions you want to know for sure are how they're going to receive their scores, when they need them by. There are still some schools that want a physical copy of your score, by the way, but most will take a digital one. When they're going to need them by, and of course, what areas of that exam are they focusing on? For example, I myself, in a humanities program, I knew that math was not an area that my department was going to look at or utilize for funding. So I didn't really have to worry about math too much. Now, the verbal and the written aspect was where I really needed to pull a stronger score, and I knew that that would impact my funding. Another question you want to know are, what are the average scores for admitted students? I really recommend speaking to a real person if you can. That means calling the department, asking to speak to the person who coordinates admissions. They usually go by a different name within each program. You most likely do not, I do not recommend you speak to faculty or professors about these topics because they don't handle this portion of evidence, right? They're more so someone you would work with for your research. Another tip I would recommend is that current graduate students are a wealth of information. So if you could consider reaching out to a current graduate student within the department, such as sending a friendly, informal email and asking them, what have GRE scores been like for admitted students in the
All right, I'm going to jump back in to take over real quick. So what B is saying is that while we don't want to reach out to faculty when you're asking questions, you do want to try to speak to folks who are working in admissions or other graduate students. So B was saying that a question that might be worth asking is maybe, what were your GRE scores, or what are GRE scores of other folks that you know were admitted? This is also information that you can often find online. Often sources like the World Report, information on different schools can help you figure out what those average scores were and help you prepare that information as you're going into your program. V, looks like you're back. Anything you wanted to add?
No, that was really it. But I would just like to emphasize, don't be afraid to ask these questions and to speak to a real person and to get that confirmation, especially if you know that this can really impact your funding. You want to be very clear on this before you apply, so that you know how to develop a strategy that is in accordance with each program. Yeah, thank you, Erica.
Yeah, no worries. If we could click to the next slide. And while we're getting to that next slide, so this is a process, like you mentioned, to start before you do the application process. So do all of your research online, call folks, really dig in there. But I also really want to emphasize, this is a process you should do before you're taking your GRE, before you're studying. A lot of folks really emphasize the GRE as like the most important part of their application process. And one, it's not. And two, the way you approach it is really going to depend on this information gathering stage. So where you're gathering information about your programs, but also about yourself. So when you're going into your study, the way you're approaching your GRE study, and again, the rest of your application, is really going to depend on where you're starting and what you're looking to do. So once you've gathered that information about your schools, gather information about yourself personally. So the first thing that I recommend doing for the GRE in any timeline, if you're taking the GRE, is to take an official practice test, full length, one sitting, as realistic as possible. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of be a diagnostic. It's going to give you a baseline GRE score. So that tells you where you're starting. Now you can maybe start to see how when we have that extra information about what are average scores for admitted students or what are requirements for your program, when you need those by, we can start to kind of build out a plan. In addition to this, a really important piece of information to know is how much time can you realistically commit to studying each week leading up to when you need your scores by. Now, for different students, this is going to depend. So if you are currently a full-time student or employed full-time, likely the amount of time that you're going to be studying per week is going to be smaller than the amount of time someone who is maybe working part-time or going to school part-time or not working or in school is going to be able to study. So try to be, again, really realistic here. Can I spend 5 hours a week? Can I spend 10 hours a week? If you're going above that, I would assume you're in maybe a spot where you're not going to school or working full time. So get your baseline GRE score, figure out how much time you can realistically commit to studying each week. Then, okay, now you've got your information about your programs, you've got your information about yourself. Start putting it together to refine your plan. So, all right, let's say I'm starting at X score and I've got Y weeks until I want to get to Z score. All right, maybe that is the average score for admitted students, or maybe that is the 75th percentile score for admitted students. All right, or maybe it's just the baseline to be considered, again, depending on your plan. At this point, you want to go, can I achieve that realistically in the time that I have? And again, realistically is the important word here. I see a lot of students who are really expecting to do kind of bananas things in a really short period of time. We want to be realistic at this phase because, again, we're very, very early. So we go, can I do this? If not, we want to reassess. Maybe this is not the right time to be applying, or maybe this is not the right program to be applying to, or maybe it's a good time to be reaching out about what are options if my score is lower? What can I do with my application if my score is maybe not where I would want it to be for that application? So get that kind of set expectation early. Now, if you're going, yes, I can achieve the score I'm looking for, then think about how competitive is your score going to be. Are you at that baseline? Are you at average? Are you at 75th percentile? Are you higher? And then once you have that information, you can kind of determine what else am I going to need to do in other parts of my application to shine. And we, again, might start thinking about our plan a little bit differently. Regardless of what situation you find yourself in, it's important to have that early on so you can plan. I think a lot of students think kind of unrealistically, like they're going to get the best GRE score in 3 weeks. That's probably not realistic. Make your plan according to reality. All right. Then also, if you're, say, going into a humanities program, that you might want to emphasize verbal. Okay, so then you can look at your scores and go, all right, if I'm looking just at the verbal section, what do I need to do? Maybe within the verbal section, are we thinking that this is going to be a challenge primarily with reading comprehension questions? Were those the questions you struggled with most in your practice test? Or maybe did you struggle more with text completion or sentence equivalence? Try to figure those things out early. So using what you know about your program and from your practice test, figure out, what am I going to focus on? What am I going to prioritize in my study as I lead up to my test date? All right. So now that we've figured out our information about programs and about GRE, we can move on to our next slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. So remember that the GRE is just one component of your profile, really, as an applicant, right? So every program differs, and your GRE is going to play a different role in every program you apply to. So once you know what your score is, basically going off of where Erica left us off, you know what score you're going to get. You've been taking those practice tests. You basically know what to expect. Now is the time to create a strategy that is responsive to that. So we know what score we're coming in at. We basically know we're going to be in that ballpark. So now, are the essays something that you need to really focus on? Is that something where you're really going to demonstrate that you're prepared for the program? You can speak to your other assets as a researcher, as a scholar, as an educator, perhaps, that are going to kind of beef up your application if your GRE is, say, not as competitive, right? Now, let's say you have a very competitive GRE score. I just want to emphasize that doesn't mean that you should overlook the essays. The essays are still a very, very, very important component. I would probably say the most important component of the application. That is where you're going to demonstrate who you are, your interests. And to be honest, there are some students that apply that do not have the test score that is required for admittance, yet their essays and their interview and perhaps the long form answer questions really speak to themselves as an applicant and their preparedness, and they will land an interview. And it's very possible that they will be admitted. So I think with this, it's important to know when to address a low score, if you do have one, and when to highlight other aspects of your application. So one question you might ask if you call a department and you speak to an advisor is, what are those typical scores of graduate students who are accepted in the past couple years? And let's say you're ranking right below that, perhaps you won't address it because you're still right in the pool. Now, if you're kind of scoring significantly below that, then I would address it, right? Because it is kind of almost like the elephant in the room. So you don't have the score of most applicants, accepted applicants into our program. Why are you still prepared? Why are you still ready to take on the research and the caliber of this research and the rigor at this time, right? You want to be transparent and you want to be able to address that because that's exactly what the review committee is going to be thinking and wondering about you as an applicant. So I hope that makes sense. Is once you have that score, then you can start to develop a strategy for each program that is responsive to where it is that you're ranking on their requirements.
All right, amazing. Can we scoot on to the next slide? And thank you so much, B. So now that we've got, okay, we have the expectation of realistically where we can go with our score. We have the understanding that, okay, based on that, we have to have a full application plan to make sure we're addressing a low score if we need to make sure other aspects of our application are shining, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we're considering that the GRE is just one aspect, but it is an aspect, right? Maybe we've gotten to the point where we go, okay, I do need to improve my score because it is the elephant in the room. Or maybe we're really trying to make our application particularly shine. Maybe the thing that we are trying to have stand out is that score, right? We want to, within our expectations, right? Within the expectation of this is when I need my score by. This is what I want it to be realistically. This is how much time I can study per week. We want to optimize our GRE score. So we want to make sure that we can deliver within those expectations. So what are the things that are going to be most important for our GRE score? And I'm seeing some questions come in. Love it. These are great questions. We'll address those in the Q&A and maybe in some of these slides in just a bit. All right. So once we have, all right, expectations set, we're going to optimize our GRE scores within them. We're going to make the most of that opportunity. So I'm going to go through what I think are the most important things to make sure your GRE score is the best it can be. The most important things. All right. So the first thing that I think is important for optimizing your GRE score, and that I've seen from my students is one of the most critical pieces and that boosts their scores the most, is locking in your timing strategy. Timing is really challenging on standardized tests, especially in a testing environment, but it is absolutely critical, especially with an adaptive test like the GRE. The way the GRE algorithm works is that there are 2 sections for quant or math, and there are 2 sections for verbal. And your performance, or the number of questions you get right in the first section of quant, determines what sorts of questions you get in the second portion. Same thing for verbal. And what you want to do is you want to be trying to get as many questions in that first section right so that you get harder questions in that second section. And then when you have harder questions, that raises your score, especially if you get more of them right. So we want to do as best we can within an individual section. So how do we do that? Well, the really great thing about a section adaptive algorithm is that you can skip around within a section. I see a lot of students make the mistake of really just getting stuck on a question, spending 5 minutes, 7 minutes, even 4 minutes, 3 minutes, too many minutes on an individual question. And when you're spending time on that question, you are taking time actively away from other questions. So, the absolute most important strategy for your timing is to skip hard questions because you can come back to them. You can pop a little flag on those questions. And then when you get to the end of the section, you can come back. So, don't waste your time on questions that are taking too much of it. Just flag it and come back later. That's going to ensure that you have time to get to the questions that are going to be easier for you. And then maybe you don't have time for the questions that are harder. The questions that take the longest are usually the ones you get wrong anyway. So that's a good idea. So you can come back at the end, do your best. Maybe a fresh set of eyes gets you the correct answer, or maybe it doesn't and you guess. That is fine. As long as we have an answer in for every question, we are good to go. So lock in your timing strategy. That is the absolute most important thing. More important than content, more important than anything, timing. All right, second most important thing is in your study, emphasize quality over quantity. I see a ton of students who are like, I've done every single question out there 5 times and my score isn't improving. That's because their study is bad. It's because often they're going through questions, go, 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 but they're not reviewing them. They're not learning anything. In fact, they're making the same mistake over and over and over and over and over and over and over again and actually building bad habits. Maybe they're using materials that aren't realistic to the test. And so their study is not good. So what we want to do is first, we want to use the best materials possible. So the first piece of that is making sure those materials are test accurate. They are realistic. You want to use questions that are official or from a reputable source. If you don't know where the question's from, you should not use it because it is unlikely to be realistic. Don't waste your time with the bad stuff. Focus on the good stuff. There's less of it, but if you use it wisely, it can benefit you more. The second piece of that is making sure that your study materials work for you. So some students are really, really great at self-study. They can get a list of questions, they can work through each question, and then questions they're confused about, they can look up online, find the expert answers on the forums, and they're good to go. That works for them. But for other students, they need a little bit more guidance. Maybe they need lessons. Maybe they need more of a refresher on some content and some strategy. Their program, maybe something like Magoosh, would be appropriate. Additionally, you might find that you are someone who likes the accountability of something live. There's something like Magoosh Jiri live classes might be appropriate. Maybe someone really needs one-on-one attention. In that case, something like a tutor might be valuable, maybe even just a couple of hours. Find what is going to be gold standard, both in terms of test accuracy, but also gold standard for you and your learning style. And I've already kind of hinted at this, but prioritize your weaknesses. Going through and drilling questions is not super useful because often those questions are not something you need to be working on, right? So focus on the things that are important for you. So things that are important for your program. If you need to be prioritizing math because your program only cares about math, only care about math. Focus on that. If your program is going to care about both, we're going to maybe focus on our worst sections. We can prioritize those weaknesses and build up our lowest areas. Within a section, you're going to want to focus on the types of problems that are giving you the most difficulty. So like I mentioned earlier, if you really need to improve your verbal score, well, what problems are you missing the most? Are you missing reading comprehension the most? Are you missing multi-question reading comprehension or single question reading comprehension? Those are different. They have different question types. Are you missing sentence equivalence the most? Are you missing text completion the most? Prioritize those weaknesses. And then even more granularly, prioritize specific individual errors. Like I said, when you make the same mistake over and over again, you actively build bad habits and your study is hurting you instead of helping you. It's a complete waste of time. So when you make a mistake, instead of moving on, stop. Hold it on that mistake and make it your goal to never make that mistake ever again. A really helpful framework is what, why, how. So what did I do wrong? Why did I do that? And then how can I not do that on a similar question? Not the same question because you're never going to see that one again, but a different question with a similar structure. How do I identify it and how do I avoid that same mistake? And when we go through that process and review maybe those notes in an error log, that helps us to not make that same mistake. It helps us to actually learn and improve. All right, so with your study, quality over quantity. Then, thing three, think critically. You might be surprised. Where's the content, right? I mean, maybe I talked a little about prioritizing weaknesses, reviewing content that's not an area of strength. And yeah, you should know the content. But that is not what this test is about. This test is not really testing, do you know geometry? It's, can you think critically using geometry as a foundation? It's not testing vocab. It's testing, can you think critically using vocab as a foundation? So when you are going through these questions, yeah, you should prioritize, do you know this or not? But you should also prioritize thinking critically. For every question, there is a trap. There is something that the test makers have devised that is going to require you to think critically to get out of. Most likely, the easiest answer, the answer that feels the most likely, is not the right answer because it's a trap. And you have to think, okay, what am I missing here? What am I missing? What piece of this is not coming together in order to get the right answer? So if anything feels too easy, pause. What's the trap? What am I not thinking about here? And that's what's going to help you get the right answer. So thinking like the person who wrote that question, going, what were they trying to do? What am I missing? All right, so content, but more than that, critical thinking. And then the last piece is to, if possible, plan for a retake. So you know when you need your scores by, but generally in test prep, students do better on their retake than on their first one. And part of that is that your first test, it gives you more of a baseline. It tells you what you need to improve on, but also because it gives you an opportunity to try a practice run. So if maybe you find that that environment is particularly stressful, you can help deal with that for next time. Or maybe you find, okay, I was really good at timing in my practice, but maybe not live. Okay, that's something that I need to deal with. Maybe you got thrown off by an experimental section, something along those lines. If possible, it's a good idea to take it once officially, give yourself a little bit of time to address some issues, and then take it again and have that be your final scores. Now, maybe that's not in the cards. Maybe you only have a few weeks until you need your scores. That's fine. Maybe it's not financially viable to take it 2 times. That's also fine. But if it is possible, setting yourself up for success by scheduling 2 test dates with a couple of weeks in between, a few weeks in between at least, can help you be most successful and get the scores that you want on that second test. All right. So hopefully that's helpful for, again, within our expectations, optimizing GRE score.
Wow, so that was a wealth of information. Thank you, Eric. I feel like that can be a webinar on its own. So wow, I needed that when I was taking the GRE. I learned a lot. So funding, now getting to the funding part, right? Okay, you took the exam, you've submitted your scores. All right, what do we do now? So the first thing you need to know is that funding within a department is completely an internal dynamic, and it fluctuates. I mean, I can't even tell you how untransparent it can be sometimes, where the money is coming from and who is supposed to receive it. When it comes to graduate students, when it comes to students already working on the dissertation, or students who are still in the master's section of their PhD, right? If the PhD is the example. So ultimately, each program you're applying to is going to have their own internal process for funding. Some programs will only take on students if they can fully fund every single one that they take on. That's just their internal process. And some programs are going to let you know before you apply that you need to allocate all of your own funding throughout the entire duration of that program. So these are questions, and this is something you need to have in mind before you select a program, right? So while your GRE score can help determine funding distributions, that is completely up to the graduate committee's discretion. You might not ever really know how it is that they decided that student A gets this funding package and student B gets a different one. So a lot of this is unclear and unavailable, but some of it can be transparent. And that is, you'll typically get more insight into that once you have been admitted into a program and you receive a funding letter, right? That comes later, but just know that sometimes when you're applying, there are many competitive applicants, right? And they all have wonderful, wonderful profiles that they're applying with. I mean, students come from all over the world and are all very unique and competitive thinkers. And unfortunately, sometimes the GRE and the GPA is the easiest way to fall back and say, okay, when it comes down to the numbers, how do we decide who gets this extra summer funding package? How are we going to decide that? How are we going to allocate that? And these are things that differ per year too, per application cycle. So one example is when I applied to my program, my institution was not technically a Hispanic serving institution. Recently, UC Santa Barbara has become a Hispanic serving institution, which means that they get a lot of extra funding. And eventually that trickles down to graduate students. So that wasn't available when I applied. And there was truly no way for me to know that. And that's not a reflection of me as an applicant or, my contribution. It's just the way that funding works at institutions sometimes. So a lot of this is a guessing game sometimes. You shoot the best score you can, you write the best essays you can, you do your very best at the interview. But at the end of the day, money within an institution and within a university is something that fluctuates a lot and that is not necessarily readily available and transparent to everybody who applies. So the internal dynamic, just know and keep in mind, is something that we don't necessarily have control over as applicants. Don't necessarily get to know what are being made and why, but just know that GRE and the GPA typically is kind of that last fallback side. Okay, these students are extremely competitive. How do we decide who gets this little extra grant for the summer or this extra travel grant for conferences? How are we going to decide that? Usually it does come down to these exams and your GPA. And that's just the way it works right now. Now, I do see that some of your questions here are like, well, what about for programs that don't even require this at all? And we're going to get to that. So we're going to get right to that. Don't worry. But just as far as for the programs that do, just know that that is the role that these exams play. All right. This is my slide. Okay, so funding is negotiable, actually. And that's something that I was not aware of when I was applying, and I didn't really learn about this until later. But funding is negotiable once you have been accepted. But in order to do this, you need to fully understand the funding package that you received. So typically, once you are accepted, you've done your interviews, you visited the program, you're like, yeah, it's a go for me. The department will distribute a funding letter to you. And that is basically like the document that's going to detail where your funding is coming from, how it's going to be distributed over the entirety of the program, and how to expect to receive it, and actually the real amount that you're going to be getting. So when I received my funding letter, I didn't fully understand how that would break down. I actually just revisited it a couple days ago, and I was like, wow, I did not know how to read this when I first received it. I didn't understand really how it would play out. So my tip to you is that once you receive that funding letter, do your very best to break it down and actually envision how that funding will be distributed over the years. If you're applying to a PhD program, I mean, that's like 7 years. So you really want to think about, okay, year one, I'm getting this amount of funding. Year two, it changes into this. Once I'm ABD, which means everything but dissertation, this is the amount of funding I will get. And you will compare every single one of those letters from programs you are accepted to. This is where the negotiation comes in. If you are applying or if you've been accepted to 2 programs that are comparable, let's say you applied to the University of California system. Let's say you got into UCLA and UC Berkeley. Those schools are very comparable and they're very competitive with each other. That is a perfect scenario to negotiate with. Let's say you got into 2 Ivy League schools, or let's say you got into Harvard and Yale, let's just say. Exactly the same, right? They're very comparable and they're very competitive. That is the perfect scenario to negotiate. If you were to tell the department at UC Berkeley, hey, I really want to come to your program. I'm really interested for all of these reasons. However, UCLA is offering me summer funding for year 3 and 4, as well as a conference stipend of X amount. Do you think you can offer something comparable? That is when they'll turn back the review committee or the graduate committee and say, okay, do we want this student because they are contributing in a research area that we don't currently have any graduate students in, but we want to say that our department is working towards? Do you see how that internal dynamic can actually turn into more money for you? So that is when you would send your request. And very often, actually, I know students who have done this. They're a lot wittier than I was at the time, and they have been able to beef up their package. And sometimes, it's just a summer funding in between your comp exams. Sometimes it's just a little bit more for those conferences. Sometimes it's just covering those fees, those university fees you might have to pay for using the printer and using the gym, all of these different things, but they do add up. And that's why I really recommend just reading that letter as closely as you can, asking someone else, another graduate student, if you know any, to read it for you and help you break it down so that you are really sharp on what it is that funding package really entails. And so that you can actually ask and say, hey, you know what? This looks great and I'm really ready to join, but I'm wondering if there's any possibility that you can offer summer funding year 2 to 3 when I expect to be collecting data, right? Something like that. You can ask those questions. And most likely, if they've already accepted you, they are going to see if they have that extra funding available. And they might poke around into extra donors or other resources, and it's worth asking. So I just want to emphasize that, because I think that's the later step that students kind of miss, is like, okay, I'm already accepted, but can I still negotiate a little bit? Is there a little bit more wiggle room? And honestly, most of the time there is, because guess what? Some of the people who have been accepted are not going to go to, they're not going to go to that program. They're going to go somewhere else. So where does that money go? Right? There might be an extra couple grand for you that you can use for summer funding or external research or whatever that is. And it's really worth asking. Okay, I think we can get to questions now. Or do we have? Yeah. All right. Let's get to some of these questions.
All right. Okay, so I can take this one. And before I answer this question, I just want to say this was very interesting for me, having had primarily a test prep perspective, to really hear these other pieces of the process. And I just really want to reiterate, having taught a lot of students on GRE, on GMAT, I see a lot of students who really think about it as the end all be all of the application process. And it's not, it's really, really not. So I really just want to hammer home that point of set realistic expectations and don't overemphasize the GRE in your prep, right? Emphasize it the right amount, but don't overemphasize it. And this is especially true as we get into scenarios like the one that this comment from Natalie England is bringing up. Can we address this scenario? If the exam is not required for program admission, how should we think about the test component when applying for financial packages? Thank you. So this is a really, really great question. And there are pieces, right? So the first piece that I want to address is the difference between test optional and test blind. And there's another question in the comments that's kind of similar. So there are schools that are in programs that are test optional and schools and programs that are test blind. Test optional means that if you send your scores, they will look at them. You don't have to send them in. If you don't want to take the test, you don't have to. But if you send them, they'll look. If you are in that scenario, I generally recommend that you do take the exam if you can have a score that is around the average or above, because it just gives another piece of evidence in your favor in the application process. Now, if the exam is not going to be a strength for you and you do not have time to get it to a position where it might be a strength, maybe not. Or maybe that's just not a reality for your timeline or for your budget. I also understand that. But if you are in a test optional situation, and that can be even a little bit compelling as a piece of your admissions case, I recommend taking the exam. Let's move to test blind. Not a ton of schools are test blind. It's more of a rare case, but it does exist. Test blind is where they say, hey, if you send your test scores, we're not even going to look at them. We don't care. We are not making them a part of our admissions decision. There, you are in a situation where that is no longer a component of your application. You should take that at face value. They will not look. So don't send it. Now, I do want to note if you are applying to multiple programs, you're going to want to look at all of them, right? Because if one of your programs is test blind and another one is test optional, it's probably wise to take the exam. And if even one of your programs is going to be test required, you're definitely going to take it. So look at your full suite. That is part of why we do that step where we gather all of that information early. So we have clear expectations around, do we even have to take the exam? Should we take the exam? And then within that, how important is it in this process? And what am I aiming for? Hopefully that helps. The other piece that I just want to point out here is that as things are changing in the admissions landscape and in the higher education landscape, which they're continuing to change, you do just want to be mindful of considering, is it the same for your program as it is for the financial package? So just confirm that if your program is test optional or test blind, that also applies to that financial package. Again, this is why it's so valuable to often speak to a human, as Bea mentioned, just to get that absolute confirmation, because sometimes these things can be less than transparent or can use strange language, strange and unfamiliar language on the website as this is becoming more common and as this landscape evolves. Hopefully that answers this question. I don't know if you have anything to add here, Bea.
No, I think that really covered it really well, Erica. Thank you. That's perfect. That's exactly what I would say, but better.
I got it. All right. Let's see. Okay. Bea, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. I'd love to. So this is actually really great if you're applying to a research-based program. So I'm assuming you're applying to like a PhD at a research institution. If you're applying to a master's and it's really not research-based, like let's say it's technical-based, then it might not have as big of an impact. If you could clarify that for us, that would be great. But I will just say, if you are applying to a research-based program, that's really great in your favor because it shows that one, you're committed to the production of knowledge, which is what these programs are committed to, and that you completely understand the publication process. So you understand how to just all of the technical aspects of producing published journals and things like that. So that's wonderful. I cannot say what percent it plays in the application process because again, a lot of that is not transparent. Programs do not break down what percent or even the scoring rubric like they will for fellowships and scholarships. They don't break down necessarily. Sometimes they do, but most often they don't break down, hey, if you have publications, this is going to make this type of impact in your application. But I will say, in my experience, being at a Research One institution and having colleagues at other Research One institutions, when you come in having already published, it really does benefit the possibility of having a competitive funding package because it's likely that you will continue in the program and complete the program because you have already been doing so. You've already been publishing, which is kind of the end all be all of these programs, is to produce and to publish in journals and eventually books. So I would say that that is really a great competitive edge. I would definitely recommend to address that research in your essays, where it is that your research is developing from there, what changes you're looking to make, or why this program now in comparison to the research you've done and the research you hope to do. So definitely integrate that into your application and make it very visible. Don't just have it on your CV because that's not really enough to flesh out what it is that that experience has done for you and has prepared you for the program you're applying to now. I hope that answers the question, but that's really great. If you already have 7 to 8 papers, that's like a lot of people finish their PhD and have 1 to 2. So that's wonderful. Getting a funding. Okay. So as far as what I know in funding and applications, rounds of applications, is that it can differ actually per year. In fact, I would expect it to differ per year. It depends on how many students have applied, the type of donors the program has, any type of restrictions that the program might have, which does happen, and the type of research direction that the program is taking. If you are within that pool of the research that that program is interested in developing now in the next 5 years, that's really going to differ for your funding package, or it's really going to impact it. So I would definitely say it's not the same or consistent in any shape or form, except for some programs do have like a basis, right? Like a baseline. So like for my program, they only accept students if they can fully fund them. That does mean that it's a much smaller pool of students that they take on. And so that kind of makes it a little bit more competitive. But if you are accepted, you know that as a baseline, you're going to get this funding package. And now anything additional is based on, which tier they have placed you in as an applicant. And that might qualify you for other things like conference funding, summer funding, things like that. But it does differ, and that's something you can ask, right? If you're calling a department and you're asking to speak to an advisor there, you can ask them, what is your funding policy for graduate students? Do you expect external funding? Do you fund the first 2 years? Do you fund the whole 5 to 7 year program for a certain? So I definitely recommend asking those questions.
I can jump in with this one. And there's a couple of pieces to this question. So this one is kind of a specific scenario where they're going, okay, we've done our research, right? We've looked at all of our programs, and we have kind of a couple of situations, right? We have a situation where a number of the schools that I'm applying to are test blind, and then the rest require the exam. Okay, interesting. And then first, I just want to make sure you actually mean test blind and not test optional. If they are test optional, you should take the test. I'm just throwing that out there. You should take the test. If they are test blind, they will not look. Then we have kind of an interesting question here. So the first thing that I want to ask is, are these top 4 to 5 schools realistic for you? Because if they are reach schools, literally all reach schools, they would you have like a less than 50% chance of getting in. If they are all in that category, then you should definitely apply to other schools as well. I generally recommend when you are applying to schools, one, don't apply to too many. Keep your list single digits, definitely. All right. So don't apply to too many, because you can spread yourself too thin and none of your applications will be very good. So realistically, sit down and think, how many applications can I make good? All right. Then within that number of applications, you need to have some that are maybe one that's like a safety. You feel very confident you are going to get in, right? You have at least a 75% chance of getting into this school so that you can go to grad school if you get in, all right, and you don't get into any of the others. Then you should have a number of schools that are right at like the 50th percentile. You're going, I feel 50-50 on whether or not I'm going to get in. That probably means that your test scores are right around average, and other pieces you're right around average. You can look at the admitted group of students and you can figure out, okay, I'm right about middle of the pack there. Then you want a couple, right? Not 4 to 5, but like a couple that are reach schools. Because we just want to think statistically here. If you want to go to grad school, you want to raise your chances of going to grad school. So that's kind of my follow-up question here, is if all of those 4 to 5 top schools that you want to go to are reaches for you, then I would definitely want to prioritize additional schools to apply to that are going to be in that kind of middle tier and safety zone so that you can go to school. And if those require the GRE, then you should take it. All right. You may not overemphasize it, but you want to emphasize it the right amount. You want to give all of your applications a solid effort. And if you're feeling like you can't do that, you should reduce the number of schools on your list. Hopefully that's helpful. But it might mean, again, rethinking your plans. V, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, that was great. I agree as far as Erica's point in the sense that every application you send in, because you put in so much time and you're probably even paying to apply, you want to make sure you give it the best shot possible. And if you cannot feasibly, with the time that you have, apply to every program you're interested in, then you need to revise and create a strategy that is feasible for you and is going to give every program you're applying to or every application the best chance possible. So I saw your follow-up comment there. It says, if I spend time on the GRE, I lose. But to those top programs that are very competitive and you're not certain if you're going to get. I'm pretty competitive, especially some people will kind of try like an experimental strategy their first round of applying, especially if you're looking for PhDs because it's such a long-term commitment. And so they'll kind of be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to give the GRE the best shot I can right now while I'm working full time. And I'm going to give these essays the best shot I can. And I'm just going to cast a really wide net. And you might get into the program you're interested in. But if you don't, you're going to learn a lot from that round of applications. And you're going to kind of narrow down a little bit more which programs you're looking for. And the second round that you apply, you're going to be a much stronger applicant because you already know how it functions. And that sounds frustrating. I mean, when I was applying, there was no way that I would have wanted to apply again. But knowing what I know now and having received the funding that I have received now, that I feel applied again if it would have meant that I would have gotten the package that I really, really wanted. If that makes sense, because especially if you're applying to a PhD, it's such a long program. You don't necessarily want to go somewhere that wasn't ideal for you, is not offering the funding that you need to survive and to make it worth your while. So I would say this just kind of comes down to developing a strategy that is feasible for you. And knowing that a lot of these things do come down to the internal dynamics. So even if that top school you weren't accepted into, but you think you're a competitive applicant, you might want to apply again. People do that. People will even be accepted and start a program and apply again, get into their top school and transfer. It happens, so there's many different strategies you can apply. And ultimately it just comes down to how much time you have, how much effort and time you have to put into your studying and your essays and all of that. And it's really a very case-by-case basis. Hopefully that offers a little bit more context for you and encouragement to go forth in the direction that your heart is calling you. Feasible, I do mean feasible in the sense of how many hours you have to study per day, per week, how much time you have to prepare for the exam. Everything that's like feasible and reasonable within the resources you have and the time you have available.
Okay, I'm going to jump in really quickly. I want to just pause our questions for a moment. Maybe we'll come back to them in just a second. But I want to do just a quick little promo about Magoosh Admissions. And V, I don't know if you want to take this because you know a little bit more about this.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for doing that, Erica, because we are past time. So if you want to be in graduate school, you absolutely belong in graduate school. That is how we feel and what we believe here at Magoosh. And so that's why we offer a bunch of resources to help the application process be a lot smoother for you. So you can scan our QR code here. You can go to Magoosh at Admissions. We have an admissions course And we have, so in the admissions course, we actually do have a tier that can review some of your SOPs and personal statements with as well. And you can find a wealth of resources there. And you can chat with some of us, some of our admissions experts. And we have instructors as well for test prep. So I think we might have another slide here as well, because we have a promo right now, because this is our first stream on YouTube. Oh, if we could go back to that last slide. Great. Oh, actually, no, that's the wrong slide. Okay. Well, this is one of our course curriculums. And so what you can expect is to build and receive support for your grad school profile. So that is, what is your profile? What is your strategy? What kind of applicant are you? What are you offering to these research programs? Basically, what is your pitch to them and why they should select you? Your GPA and planning for tests, which I think is such a wonderful resource. This is going to help you kind of schedule your studying and just, you know, kind of mapping out where it is that you're going as you're preparing for the exam. We also offer support as far as what these letters of rep are supposed to do, developing a strong CV, and then of course we cover grad school funding as well, and writing your essays and everything that goes into that, brainstorming and outlining, writing your introduction, and really effective body paragraphs. This is the genre in itself. And a lot of us have not had any experience with this genre of writing prior to applying. So that is why we offer this kind of support. And we really care about this aspect of the application because it really pulls so much weight and it does so much for you. So go ahead and check us out. You can scan this little QR code here. You can find us on Discord once you go to our website. I pop into Discord, and many of our other admissions experts do as well. So we are over time. I want to let you all know that we will continue with these webinars. You can find them same place, same time next week. Moving forward. And yes, as you can see in our chat, we're offering a 20% off right now for admissions courses. It is high admission season, so take advantage while you can and share that with other people that you know that are applying. And I really hope this has been helpful for you. And I hope to see you all again soon in our next webinar.
Thanks so much, everybody.